Thanks for joining us again on the After Dinner Leadership podcast. Now, we have guests from all sorts of different walks and fields, and today we're going to look at leadership through the lens of the music industry. The one and only legend of rock, Bruce Springsteen, is our topic of conversation, and the author of a book called Lead Like the Boss, Andy Freed, is joining us. He's also the chairman of Virtual Inc. Really pleased to have him and to talk about some of the fascinating insights that we can get from the way in which Bruce has sustained his success being a high performer and leading a high performing team for over 50 years. And that's impressive in any field. So please take a listen. And as you find it useful, please share, subscribe, pass it on to someone who you think would also benefit from listening, and enjoy. And we have a special welcome to our guest today, Andy Freed, who's the chairman of Virtual Inc. and the author of Lead Like the Boss. Welcome, Andy, to the After Dinner Leadership podcast.
Simon, great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I mentioned to you before we come on air, like when I got the note about your book, I was just really intrigued about the link of Bruce Springsteen and leadership. And the little I know of him, I mean, I know his playlist, but I love the idea that he's had decades of sustained high performance. And in any profession, I have great admiration for that and an inspiration. So I'm looking forward to jumping into that.
Yeah, he's an interesting character for sure.
Maybe there's something. Yeah, it's amazing. Like looking at these artists, I'm particularly interested. What got you first interested in Bruce? And then we'll talk a little bit about you in a moment. But like, why have you made this link?
Well, so first, Bruce's music certainly was something. I am one of those folks who's a big Bruce fan. And, in 1977, I got my mom to buy me a copy of Born to Run, Bruce's big album at the time. And, when I was probably 12 years old, and my mom said, "Are you going to keep listening to this?" And it turns out that I kept listening to it and listened to it every week and every day, for the next 50 years. But in the end, what I'll say is one of the biggest pieces of praise that you can always hear on a performance review where everyone wants to be is rock star. When you talk about people who are great workers in your company, oh, she's a real rock star. So if you want to figure out how to be a rock star, why not look at the boss of all rock stars and figure out how to do it? So that's kind of a little bit of the premise of the book is, how has Bruce done what he's done?
Super.
What's the way he carries himself? And how can we take some of those leadership lessons to become rock stars ourselves?
Right. Well, let's explore that as we go into the conversation. Let's come back to you for a moment. And one of the things I like to explore is we're around this virtual dinner table, and what food, if you imagine that laid out before us here, what food reminds you of your childhood?
I'm probably a pizza guy. I grew up in suburban New York, just outside New York City. And I didn't appreciate how good the pizza was in suburban New York until I moved away, and discovered that you can't just walk into any place in the world and get a great slice. So I would say I'm a pizza guy.
And what particular toppings or offering would remind you?
I'm pretty straightforward. I'm a cheese or margarita man. I've now traveled the world having margarita pizza everywhere in the world. I've got my favorite places in Tokyo, my favorite places around London, wherever I can go.
Brilliant, great. And if we look at the 3 leadership lessons that you wish you'd learned earlier, where's your thoughts go for that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think there are a few that I see. One, and I'll tell not surprisingly tie them all back to Bruce and a little bit about the book. One is that you recognize that it's not just Bruce Springsteen up on stage; it's Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. And Bruce realized early on that he needs a band and he needs supporting characters and he needs to have other people around him who push him and make him better, and who he's also able to use as support. And I think that's something that a lot of people in their 20s and a lot of people in their in their 30s could build up more, is recognizing that part of your job in your 20s is to find your bandmates and to find the people who are able to, to carry you through, and the people who will be kind of anchors in your career. I'm always struck, and I think it's, it's more challenging now as people work remotely. But I'm struck that often, we'll have 20 somethings in the office who haven't met everybody, or they don't know what their next door neighbor does. And, learning those things and building your band, I'd say that's probably lesson number one.
Brilliant. Love it.
Lesson number two is being intentional in your communications and really thinking about it. And that's something that, Bruce does as he pulls together a set list for a show, is he really thinks about, where is this going to go? What's the things I want people to think, feel, and do during this show, and not leave it up to chance of where those communications are going, not leaving it to, just happenstance. He doesn't just get up there and play and hope for the best. He gets up there with a plan. And that leads into the last piece, which I'd say is preparation. And, understanding how important it is to prepare for those moments, to just get things right. I think that, there's too many things where we're not thinking about the moment and how important it can be. And that moment can pass you by if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah. I love those. Okay, so let me play those back. So we've got the awareness of the importance of the band, and I love this: find your bandmates early, sort of form the band. I really love the image that creates. Actually, I've not heard that phrase before, so that's really cool. Second one is being intentional in your communication, and third, a bit of a partial link, but the broader point of preparing well.
Absolutely.
And doing things right, preparing so you can do things right, or to a high standard. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's a fair summary. I think you got it.
Yeah, super. Great. So let's go back to that first one. I mean, I watched a video clip of you speaking, and you highlighted the exit of Bruce, the band off the stage after a performance. Could you just talk to that a little bit? Because I thought it was a really interesting perspective.
To me, more than anything, that's the moment when it struck me of what a leader Bruce is. And that is, at the end of every show, Bruce goes to retreats to the back of the stage, and he stands there and he shakes the hands of everybody in the band as they leave the stage. And right now, in the last tour, Bruce played with 19 people on stage. He had a brass section, he had a second drummer, he had 19 people on stage, and he stands at the back, and you can watch as he shakes their hands, and some of them he hugs, some of them he high fives, some of he's whispering a word in their ear. But each one of them gets a personal greeting. And some of them are people he's played with for just this tour. And some of them are people he's played with since 1973. But he recognizes that it's his job as a leader is to make them feel appreciated. And when you hear them talk about it, and in a recent interview, the band members were talking about that moment, and they said, for 10 seconds every night, Bruce Springsteen makes me feel like the most important musician on the face of the earth. And more than anything, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing as leaders? If I can make the people that I'm working with feel like they're the most important people on the face of the earth, and that they're doing great work, and that they're truly appreciated. And years ago, it was written that the deepest human need is the need to be appreciated. And that's so important for leaders to show. And that's important in any direction. That's important whether you're the chairman of the board or whether you're starting out. To show appreciation for the folks around you is just so critical.
Yeah. I really like that perspective. Has that moment in time in his routine got a name? I mean,
no, it's really just one of those things. It's just Bruce being Bruce, and it's one of those things where you can see that's part of one of the things you said at the beginning is what's that test of longevity? How do you last 50 years? You last 50 years by showing appreciation to the folks that are your supporting cast, and making them feel important and making them recognize that that you understand how important they are.
Yeah, and I really like that. And the analogy of this finding bandmates as well, where my mind has gone with that, and let's just see if it tallies with your thinking here, is this idea of thinking that I need a drummer, I need a bass guitarist, or I'm the drummer and I need a lead vocalist or whatever it is. There's something around the variety, the diversity of that band, not collecting 5 drummers or 4 saxophone players. It's actually that richness of having those different bandmates alongside you. That's where my mind has gone. Is that
Absolutely.
Is
It's
that
the idea that those folks complete you.
yeah.
And those folks, kind of, make you richer as you're going through it. There's a TED Talk from a woman by the name of Meg Jay, who talks about, and Meg talks about people in their 20s and how one of the most important concepts for people in their 20s is loose connections. The idea of building those connections with people. Who are your neighbors? Who are your workmates? And discovering that within that, you can find a lot of skills and a lot of things that complement you, and things that will ultimately help you as you're developing your career. I think that's all part of finding that band. You shouldn't go through your early stage as a leader as a solo act. You should try to build as big a band as you can. When I look back, so much of my network and so much of my foundation right now is things I built in my 20s.
Yes.
So it's never too early to do that.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Whilst we're talking about Bruce and the E Street Band, is there anything else in terms of the band dynamics? I asked you to zoom in on that exit from the stage, but is there anything else in the dynamics there that you would take?
I think one of the things which is key is Bruce's nickname of the boss comes from him truly functioning as that. And he recognized early in the band that, as he said, band needs a lightly controlling hand, that somebody needs to be in charge, that otherwise it's going to spin a little bit out of control. Everyone's going to want to do their own thing. People are going to get into different misadventures, and you need a lightly controlling hand over it. And I think the idea of, bosses are necessary. You need somebody who's going to take control and, take that leadership role. That's part of also how that band has stood the test of time, is by having standards and having having somebody who was really in control. Years ago, when Clarence Clemens passed away, who was their legendary saxophonist, his nephew tried out for the band. And when Jake first tried out, Bruce's answer was, "You're not good enough. You're not bringing your A game. And I don't care what your last name is. If you're going to be part of this band, you bring your A game." And Jake was shocked, went home, and a few weeks later came back and brought his A game. And, now he's an integral part of the band on stage and a huge part of Bruce's presence. But that idea of having a boss who has standards and, has kind of a direction where we want things to go, I think that's so important.
Yeah, I agree. And how have you seen that play out for you in your leadership, some of those dynamics? We've talked about Bruce. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of the same thing. One, I really try to show appreciation to my team. One of the things which I'll say, my chief of staff is the recipient of endless messages of my showing the video of the end of the Bruce show. And my message to her is always, help me be this good. Help me be this good at showing appreciation. Help me make sure I don't miss those moments. So that's something which I've really taken to heart, is just how important that is. But also a lot of the things as we keep to talk on the importance of driving communication in a certain way, and the way that Bruce, will work with the audience. Of, he understands when he wants the audience to be excited, when he wants the audience to be thoughtful, when he wants the audience to be, listening to a story. All of those things are very intentional. And understanding that intent and understanding how to drive that is a big part of what I've tried to take to my leadership.
Yeah, great. I mean, that's a lovely link to the second point. So let's go there in more detail. I love what you've led us in with there. How do we apply that? So this idea of him was influencing the mood. How do I do that?
One of the challenges we have in communication right now is it's almost become too easy. I want to talk to you in the UK, and I can click a button and boom, you're on my screen. It's remarkable. And there's no forethought that goes into it. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is, Bruce creates the set list. He starts out every show by sitting alone in his dressing room with a blank piece of paper and writing out the songs he's going to play in a specific order that play a specific mood and create something. And he's doing that because he knows in the end what he wants the audience to think, feel, and do at the end of the show. So often for leaders right now, if you present somebody with a communication challenge, they don't start that way. They start by opening PowerPoint, taking the last presentation they did, retitling it with a new date, and starting to crank out slides. And we've all been guilty of that. We've all done that. But that's very different than sitting down there. So now when I sit down, if I've got a staff meeting where it's a chance to talk to my whole company, I start out with that blank piece of paper. And I start out with what I want them to think, feel, and do at the end of this. What are the things that, and that feel part's so important. What's the feelings I want them to evoke? Do I want them to feel hopeful? Do I want them to feel challenged? But I really sit and think about that before I open PowerPoint, before I take the stage, before I start talking to folks. That intentionality, I think, is so important in communication, and so lacking right now.
Yeah, I thank you, and I really I find that interesting. I've been working on a project recently of helping biotech startups with their pitch presentations to potential investors, and of course you've got deep scientists that are deep into their research, and then they're turning into some of them. A guy I was with this morning, in fact, was very nervous about the overselling and not making promises that he doesn't feel completely secure in as a scientist, and of course we don't want him to lie or anything, but there's ways of using language intentionally that still breeds confidence in the investor rather than nervousness. And often that opening song, shall we say, is the way that sets the tone for the rest of the set list, if you like. And the think, feel, and do triad that you've been talking about is such a nice frame to think about with the planning of that. You put a particular emphasis on feelings there, Andy, and I'd love to explore that a little bit more. Why feeling so much for you as an important part of that preparation and intentionality?
I think a lot of leaders don't realize the degree to which they're setting the emotional tone for their organization. And that if you don't think about those feelings, then people's ability to hear other messages is impaired. I use in the book a few examples. Something as simple as, in the United States, we'll talk about like people's health insurance. And if I'm talking about we're changing health insurance plans, and I just get right into the facts of we're changing plans, it's going to be X, Y, and Z. I'm ignoring the fact that for a lot of the audience, they're thinking about, well, this is really important to me. This is what doctor I go to. This is how my family is going to be healthy. I need to first say to them, hey, I understand how important this is. This is personal to you. It's personal to me. It's something that is vital that we take care of because it's how you take care of your family. They need to understand from me that I understand how they feel about this before they're even able to hear the facts. And if I ignore that, I risk the tone going, way off kilter.
Yeah. Great stuff. And then this third piece, then we're talking about preparation and getting things right. And again, give us an example of Bruce's rigor in this regard, in addition to what you've already shared, of course. In what ways is that?
Well, there's any number of things, but I'll say everything within a show is carefully scripted. Where people are going to be on stage, he knows, so he's not running into people, and he has an understanding of what's happening. But another element of preparation, frankly, is also even just the technical side of thinking about it. I've never been to a Bruce show where I couldn't hear Bruce, but I've been to a lot of Zoom calls where I couldn't hear the other person on the other end of the line. And just being mindful of that preparation. And it's understanding that now we're more than 5 years from the pandemic when everyone started with the great Zoom adventure. And yet we're still on calls all the time where somebody can't find the mute button. At some point, we need to take responsibility for that on being prepared and making things really work. Because the reality is that if people can't hear you, they're definitely not listening. So that kind of preparation, which goes from thinking about where you're sitting for the meeting, and whether you're well lit, and whether people can hear you over the background noise, to really thinking about what you're saying and what your role is. That kind of preparation is so essential for communication going well.
Yeah. Could you bring that into the in-person environment as well? Because I love the little suggestions you're making there in terms of the virtual meeting. So I'm a leader, maybe a fairly new one, team leader. I'm got a team meeting, let's say 5, 10 people coming into the room in half an hour. What are some of the things that you might have on your mind that would ensure or encourage that meeting to go well?
Well, it's funny. This podcast is a great example of that. Is when you talk about after dinner leadership, sometimes the best way to make that meeting go well is to recognize that the most important part of that meeting is the 5 minutes before it starts and the 10 minutes afterwards, when you are building relationships with the people in the room, finding out who they are, where they come from, and then the 10 minutes afterwards when you're debriefing on the meeting,
Yeah.
and understanding that and being present for that, because often you'll see people in the first 5 minutes of the meeting, you'll see some folks who are engaging the other people in the room, and some people who are staring at their phone, and some people, when the meeting ends, will rush right out, and others will sit and think about it and say, what do you think about how that went? That's the premise of your podcast, is how valuable those 10 minutes afterwards can be. And I think that's completely accurate. I mean, so understanding that, and understanding that that's such a huge advantage that you have when you're face to face, compared to, often with, the experience you have on Zoom where people are clicking and rushing off.
Yes.
To have that relationship building is just so important.
Yeah. Thank you. I value that. Okay, that's great. And so we've got this key elements of leading like a boss that you've like laid out as part of your own experience there. One of the things that I would love to do is just continue this kind of analogy. Perhaps it's through communication, but I picked up from your comms around this idea of owning the stage, play the hits, invite participation, and deliver the encore. As if we take this same performance
Yep.
element and link that to our day to day. Could you just talk through those a little bit more for me, and just
Sure.
how
I mean,
important they are in the
so
communication?
one thing I'll say is that it's important to have, as you're a leader, some core messages, and understand what those core messages are, and understand that people need to hear those core messages often 7 times before they are, able to kind of, internalize them. Often you'll see leaders that will get bored of that before the 7 times, because they're saying, well, I've already said this twice. Isn't that enough? And they move on. That's like, moving on before the recommended dose of the drug. You haven't given the audience what they need. Now compare that to Bruce. Bruce has played Born to Run 1,878 times live. And every time he plays it, he recognizes that there's somebody in the audience that's never heard it before. So he's got to give it his best. And there's also somebody in the audience like me who's heard it 90 times before, who's comparing it to every other time they've heard it. So he's got to give it his best. That's understanding that importance of your central message, and that you need to keep repeating it. He can't come on stage and say, people will be disappointed if it's, well, I'm just not going to do that one tonight. So he understands that, and understands how important it is to really bring us all to that message is just so critical. And that piece of bringing your all is also recognizing that nobody cares more about what you have to say than you do. So you're the pinnacle of energy in the room and need to act like it. So at a Bruce show, he is the pinnacle of energy. Everyone else is a step below. And it's the same thing when you're on stage talking about, something for work, or talking to a pharmaceutical company about a pitch. You are the one in the room who's the most interested. If you're not bringing the energy and you're not bringing the spark, you can't expect everyone else to exceed you on it. So
Yeah.
recognize that you're setting that peak is also something that's very, very important.
Very good. Very good. Do you have a favorite Bruce track, by the way?
I do. Thunder Road. Thunder Road's carried me from those days in 1977 to today, where it's got two lyrics in it that I love. One is it has one lyric of "Your graduation gown lies in rags at their feet," which when I was coming out of university and coming out of schooling, that's the line that spoke to me. I was in my 20s. My graduation gown lies at their feet. Now you go a little bit earlier in the song, and there's that line of "You're scared and you're thinking you're not that young anymore." And as I make my way through my 50s, I recognize that I'm not that young anymore, and my chances to influence and chances to lead are there's more yesterdays than there are tomorrows. So I've got to make sure that I'm taking advantage of all of them.
Yeah. Great. And I mean, he's quite famously a great lyricist as well as a musician. I guess is that, you've quoted a couple of lines from him there. So it's like multifaceted aspects of his.
Yeah, no, he
leadership.
certainly has. Yes, he certainly has a little bit of ability as almost like an American poet laureate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Quite incredible. I'm on Fire, I think, is my favorite.
That's a good one. That's a solid one.
That's right. Yeah, solid. I say I don't have a expansive knowledge of his set list, but I tell you, in preparation for this, I was realizing, wow, I didn't realize that song was so old. It's like one of those. I thought that was
1984.
I thought that was the 90s, but then it's
yep.
the 80s, that kind of thing. So
well, I hate to tell you, sometimes I'd also realize is that I didn't realize I was that old.
Yeah, well, I'm in my 50s as well, and it's like this is music I've grown up with, but it's like I placed it in a slightly different time zone. But yeah, incredible. Okay, what is it that you would like to have people take from this? If there's nothing else in reading this book, you've crafted hours and hours of time and energy in preparing it and writing it. What is it you'd like people to take from it?
I think the idea that leadership and communication are just inextricably linked, and that you can't be an effective leader without really thinking about your communication skills. And those communication skills are something which you can hone, you can improve, but they come with real intent. And I think that the problem with communication is everyone thinks it's already taken place, and just because we're talking doesn't mean we're communicating, and just because I've created a PowerPoint doesn't mean that I've made my point. So the idea that leadership and communication are just so intertwined and so a part of one another, and that you really need to be very thoughtful and very cognizant of communication. And that's something which you can do at any stage of your career and start building early on. There's always a need for people who are great communicators, who are able to communicate to their teammates, and whether it's a young manager communicating up or an older manager communicating down, it's the same skill levels.
Yeah. Can you think of an experience where that hasn't gone well for you in the past?
There's any number of times where, I've intended to tell a story or intended to say something and realized that it's just fallen flat because I didn't understand the context. I didn't understand how people were hearing it. There's a story I tell of another company in the book that went through a merger. And one of the things they did after their merger was they decided that they were going to start to provide cafeteria service for their employees every day until 6 p.m. And they were going to provide that for at low charge. And they did that for the reason being that they thought that the restaurants in the area of their office closed too early, and they wanted people to be able to grab a bite to eat. Well, they didn't explain it well, and it immediately became the rumor mill of, did you know they're providing meals until 6 because they want us to not go home at night? And that they're taking away our work-life balance because they want us to stay here now for our meals and not go home with our families. And the entire message got out of hand. It actually wound up causing the dissolution of the firm, because people were leaving saying, this place is no longer family friendly. All because they started offering meals until 6 o'clock because restaurants in the area were closed. They hadn't thought about the implication. And they hadn't thought also about all the pieces of the think, feel, do. They told the facts of the cafeteria is open. They never really explained why, and never really explained on the do part that this is just to make things easier for you, not to take away your ability to go home. We're doing this just so you're not wandering around looking for food at 3 o'clock. But understanding pieces like that, there's a lot of places where things have gone sideways for folks, myself included.
Yeah. Great. Excellent. And I guess the other component that I just would like to explore for you, obviously you're leading an organization. What's the, if someone's writing a book about you, so we've got Lead Like the Boss, what would be the title that Andy would get?
I would hope that it's understanding that feeling part, and that's hope that leading from the heart would be the thing that I really strive for. My company is relatively small. We have a couple of hundred employees. I think they're all named Caitlin, as far as I can tell, or some derivative of it right now. I really do care deeply about every one of them, and care deeply about their success in our organization, their relationship to our clients, and where they're going in their careers, and just understanding that, and understanding just the importance that can be. When I think of some of the mentors that I had when I was in my 20s, and realize that I now have that responsibility that I'm in my 50s, if folks are looking at me that way, it's something which I take really seriously, of how can I deliver on that for some of our folks.
Thank you. And maybe it's my final question. I think today is clearly you will have spoken about this. The book launches in February
10th. It comes out next week.
February 10th, which is great. So this will go live around the same time as the launch, which is fantastic. I'd love to just find out what we haven't spoken about today that you wish we had.
I think we covered most of what I'd love to. I mean, for me, it's really just going back to those central messages of how important communication is. I mean, for me, the important thing isn't the breadth of what we cover, but the depth of it. And, people understanding that, communication is a skill that, they really need to develop, to understand that being intentional about it really makes a difference, and that you're able to move the needle, and to understand the value of appreciation. I think to, just focus in on those things, and, just how important the depth of that is just so critical.
Brilliant. Thank you. I've really appreciated you sharing what you have done, Andy, and I look forward to reading it. And I look forward to listening more to Bruce in a slightly different way, seeing him as a leader, not just as a great rock star.
Excellent.
It's a great thing. Thank
Mission
you.
accomplished.
If someone wants to reach out to you, how do they best do that?
They can go to andyfreed.com, and there's a contact form there. Would love to chat with anybody who'd love to talk more about leadership or communication.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Much
Thank you, Simon.
appreciated, and best of success. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.